The turkey was still warm when my son told me, in front of everyone, that I had ruined his life. Not whispered, not pulled aside, not a private conversation over cold coffee after the guests had gone home. He said it at the table, with the gravy still steaming, with my grandchildren's wide eyes blinking like startled birds, with my daughter-in-law staring into her plate as though she might find mercy buried somewhere between the stuffing and the cranberry sauce. Daniel said it clearly, loudly, and without flinching. And I, his mother, the woman who had labored 22 hours to bring him into this world, the woman who had pressed his forehead with a cold cloth through 3 winters of fever, the woman who had driven 4 hours in a snowstorm to watch him, accept an award at a company dinner he later said didn't matter. I sat there and could not speak. That was the Thanksgiving I will never forget. Not for the food, not for the laughter that came before, but for the silence that followed my son's words, a silence so complete it felt like the whole house had inhaled and forgotten to breathe. Before the storm, I should tell you that Daniel had always been difficult to love easily. That is not a cruel thing for a mother to say. It is simply true. Some children fold into you like warm bread. Others arrive already armored, already watching the world with a kind of careful suspicion, as if they came out of the womb knowing that disappointment was coming and decided to meet it standing up. Daniel was the second kind. He was brilliant, that was never in question. By 9, he was reading books I struggled with at 40. By 16, he had taught himself Spanish and basic coding from library books and sheer stubbornness. By 24, he had built a small software company from a spare bedroom and a second-hand laptop, the kind of origin story that journalists love to print in the paragraph right before the photo. But brilliance, I have learned, does not make a person easy. Sometimes it makes them harder. Daniel remembered everything. That was both his gift and his wound. He remembered the Christmas I forgot to pick up his bicycle from layaway because money was short and I was working 2 jobs and I simply, exhaustedly forgot. He was 7. He still mentions it sometimes, not with cruelty, just with the flat precision of someone reciting a case file. He remembered the night I chose to work overtime instead of attending his middle school science fair, the one where he won 2nd place, and stood in the gymnasium with his project board and no parent beside him. I had sent his Aunt Patricia. She brought a camera and took pictures and said he seemed proud. Daniel told me years later that he had practiced a speech, practiced what he would say to me when I arrived. He had rehearsed gratitude for a mother who never showed up to receive it. I carried that, I carry it still. But I was a single mother after his father left when Daniel was 4. I was a woman with a mortgage, 2 children, a car that needed new tires every year, and a body that ran on black coffee and the specific adrenaline of not having a choice. I made mistakes. I missed things. I loved him every single day through all of it. That had always seemed, to me, like enough. To Daniel, I was beginning to understand. It was not. The table is set. Thanksgiving that year was at my house. It had always been at my house. For 21 years since I bought the place on Elmwood Drive I had hosted. I had polished the silver candlesticks my own mother left me. I had ironed the good tablecloth, the cream one with the embroidered edges that only came out 4 times a year. I had made the sweet potato casserole from scratch, the one with the brown sugar and the pecans on top, the one that Daniel had requested every year since he was 8 years old. He called in October to confirm he was coming. Just the 4 of us, I asked. Him, his wife Renata, and their 2 kids, Marcus, who was 9, and little Sophie, who had just turned 6 and still reached for my hand when we walked anywhere together. Just us, he said. His sister Alina would be there too, with her husband and their baby. The whole family, arranged around my good table, in my house that smelled like roasting meat and cinnamon candles, the way it always did in November. I spent 3 days cooking. I want you to understand that. 3 days. Not because I needed to, not because a simpler meal would have been inadequate, but because feeding my family well was the primary language I had for love. When I could not always find the words, when the gap between me and Daniel felt too wide and too deep for a phone call to cross, I cooked. I put my hands in dough and stirred stock and roasted bones, and made the kind of meal that takes time as its main ingredient, because time was the thing I was always being accused of withholding. This was my offering, every year. This was my apology and my affirmation and my I love you all piled onto one table. He arrived at 2 in the afternoon. Marcus ran in first and grabbed my waist, the way children do when they have decided you are safe. Sophie came after him, quieter, her dark eyes moving around the house like she was confirming everything was still where she'd left it. Renata hugged me warmly, the way she always did. Renata had always been kind to me, quietly so, in the way of someone keeping peace in 2 directions at once. Daniel hugged me last. It was a brief hug, the kind you give to someone you are still deciding about. The crack in the plaster. Dinner started beautifully. Alina's baby was passed around the table like a small, drooling miracle. Marcus made everyone laugh by attempting to explain cryptocurrency to his grandfather's empty chair. We had started leaving the chair for my late father, a tradition that had simply calcified into ritual. Sophie ate only rolls and declared them perfect. Renata told a story about her office that had the whole table going. Daniel was quiet but not hostile. He ate well. He refilled his wine twice. He smiled at his children. I thought we were going to be fine. It started with something small. It always does. Alina made an offhand comment about the house, something about how she missed growing up here, the comfort of it, the way the kitchen always smelled the same. She said, "Mom always made this place feel like home even when everything else was chaos." It was meant as a compliment. I received it as one. Daniel set down his fork. Not loudly, not dramatically, just set it down with a kind of deliberate quiet that I recognized. I had been watching that gesture my whole life. That careful stillness was what happened right before Daniel said the thing he had been saving. "I don't remember it that way," he said. Alina looked at him. "What way?" "Home feeling safe, Mom being present, the warm, soft version of our childhood you're describing." He picked up his wine glass, didn't drink from it. "Just held it. I don't remember that." The table shifted, not physically, but the air changed temperature. "Daniel," Renata said quietly, "I'm just saying I don't share the same memory." His voice was calm. That was the terrible part. He was not angry, or rather, his anger had aged so long it had fermented into something icier. "We didn't have the same childhood, Alina. You were younger. Mom had more to give by the time you were old enough to need it." I should have spoken then. I understand that now. I should have redirected, suggested we move to the living room, offered dessert, done any of the 1,000 small acts of deflection that mothers learn over decades of keeping families from splitting along their fault lines. But I was already bracing, because I could feel what was coming the way you feel a change in barometric pressure, in your joints, in your chest, before any cloud has appeared on the horizon. "She worked," Alina said, a little defensively. "She did the best she could." "She chose work," Daniel said, repeatedly, when it wasn't the only option. "That's not fair." "I'm not interested in fair." He looked at me then, directly, with 20 years of carefully catalogued grievance arranged behind his eyes. "I've spent a lot of time in therapy, Mom. A lot of years understanding why I have the relationship with trust that I have. Why I find it difficult to believe that people will show up. Why I built a company instead of a community, because companies don't leave you standing in a gymnasium with a speech prepared and no one to give it to." The gymnasium. He had come back to the gymnasium. "Daniel," my voice came out smaller than I intended. "I'm not trying to hurt you," he said, and I believed him, which somehow made it worse. "But every year we sit at this table and we perform gratitude and we act like the past is just scenery. And I'm tired of it. I'm tired of watching you serve food like absolution, and none of us saying what this family actually cost." What costs look like. The children were still at the table. That was the part I kept returning to in the days and weeks that followed. Marcus and Sophie, still at the table, their small faces navigating the sudden weather of adult pain with the expert uncertainty of children who have learned to read rooms. Marcus looked at his plate. Sophie looked at me. I excused them gently. Elena took them to the living room. Her husband followed, holding the baby against his chest like a shield. And then it was just me and Daniel and Renata at the table that I had spent 3 days preparing. Under the light of the candles, I had polished the silver holders for. Beside the tablecloth, my mother had embroidered by hand sometime in the 1970s. Say what you need to say, I told him. He did. He said it all. The bicycle, the science fair, the spring formal I had missed because of a work trip I hadn't fought hard enough to reschedule. The summer he was 15 and I had sent him to his grandmother's for 6 weeks because I was overwhelmed, and he had understood at 15 that he was being sent away, and had never entirely forgiven me for making a 15-year-old understand that his mother was overwhelmed. He said he had spent his whole adult life building things that couldn't leave. Building systems, structures, companies, things with foundations he controlled, because he had spent his childhood in a foundation that felt uncertain. He said he loved me. He said that loving me had always been one of the more painful things he did. I sat with all of it. I did not cry. I am not sure why. I think perhaps because crying would have been about me, and this was not about me. This was about him, finally, after 40 years of breathing, saying the thing out loud that he had been composing in the dark. When he finished, the room was very quiet. I know, I said. He looked at me. I know I missed things. I know the missing left marks. I know that me telling you why doesn't change what you experienced in the absence. I folded my hands on the tablecloth. I was drowning, Daniel. For most of your childhood I was drowning, not as an excuse, just the truth. I was a woman alone with 2 children and a world that was not set up to help me succeed at any of it. I failed you in specific ways because I was failing in general, and you deserved better. You did. He was quiet for a long moment. I needed to hear you say that, he said finally. Not the defense, just that. I know, I said again. After, we didn't resolve it that night. Real things don't resolve over one meal, even a meal that took 3 days to prepare. Renata and I cleaned the kitchen together, quietly, the way women sometimes process things through motion. She squeezed my shoulder at the sink and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. Daniel put the children to bed in the guest room. When he came back downstairs, he sat with me at the kitchen table while Elena and her family watched television in the other room, and we talked, not about the past, but about ordinary things, about Marcus's soccer team, about a book he'd been reading, about whether the maple tree in the backyard was going to have to come down. It was not forgiveness, it was not resolution. It was 2 people choosing to remain in the same room. Which is, I think, how the long work begins. What I know now. A year has passed since that Thanksgiving. Daniel and I talk on the phone more than we used to. Not always easily, not always with warmth, but with a kind of honesty that wasn't there before, the honesty of 2 people who have already said the worst and survived it. He sent me a card on my birthday this year. It was brief. It said, "I'm still working on it. I wanted you to know that." I keep it on my kitchen windowsill, between the African violet and the small clay pot Sophie made me at school. I see it every morning when I make my coffee. Family gatherings should be about love. I believe that still. But love, real love, the kind that holds between people with complicated histories and old wounds and long memories, is not the soft, uncomplicated thing we set the table for. It is harder than that, and braver. It shows up in gymnasiums, even after the science fair is over. It sits at tables where the turkey has gone cold. It says I'm still working on it and means it. My son broke something open that Thanksgiving. He broke it open at my good table, in front of the embroidered tablecloth, under the warm light I had prepared for a different kind of evening. And in the breaking, I think, something finally had room to breathe.